The bottom line, the weather pattern is dramatically changing as we head through this week into next week. And we're going to see some really cold air, I think, for the eastern 2/3 of the country, really from the Rockies east. We're going to dive into that specifically in this extra video tonight as we track this data. I want to show you why you can't dive into any of these deterministic models that are being put out there wholly. Models aren't the end-all be-all. And I'm going to tell you why in this video. We are way too far out to find a solution. This is looking down from the North Pole. The X that I've marked here is where the energy or the wave in the upper atmosphere is that's going to eventually form our storm. The first one that we're looking at heading into this upcoming weekend. Beyond that, come on. I mean, we've got stuff that's still way upstream here across Asia that's got to come around the entire planet. And how is it going to align for a snow in your small city somewhere in the south or in the mid-Atlantic or in the northeast or in the Midwest or in the Central Plains? The bottom line is, I don't know. There is no way I could tell you yes or no. But it's hard to deny what we're seeing happen here in the upper levels. We're going to get a really amplified pattern as we head into next week. There's that energy. We're watching it still as we head into Wednesday. And I think by the end of the week, this is where things get really interesting for the forecasting model guidance. Every day, a couple of times a day, especially once you get ashore here into the United States and North America, weather balloons go up from the bottom of the atmosphere to the top of the atmosphere. They're measuring the atmospheric pressure, the wind, the dew point, all of those things get plugged into forecast model equations, and you get this numerical weather prediction models and its guidance. And there's a bunch of it out there, right? So in this particular run, we're looking at the European model. Now, I'm just going to say all the models have this really amplified pattern. When I say amplified, look, we went from a fairly west to east flow to buckling this thing up over the Pacific with a ridge up across Alaska, a trough digging into the continental United States, a huge ridge up across Greenland, now a trough digging into Europe, which makes it cold. It's one of the reasons we get cold in Europe. It's about the same time we usually get cold in the United States. And it looks like we're headed that way as we move into next week. The question is, as we get amplified, that's usually when you get a storm. And I'm wondering, will we see one? Well, let's look at some of the guidance today. And this is something that is really interesting to see too. This cold air that's building down from the North Pole. This has been on the models for the last couple of days, backing it up to where we are now. Take a look at how a piece of this polar air, this polar vortex, if you will, that's up here spinning, chunk of that cold air poised to break off as we move into Wednesday and Thursday. That moves across the Great Lakes, straight into the mid-Atlantic, down into the southeast. That's cold air moving into Texas. This is the air temperature at about 850 millibars. This level of the atmosphere isn't affected by the warming and cooling of the daytime temperature. So you get to see that cold air a little clearer. And look what happens as we head into the next week. Again, this is all guidance, but did you see it? It looks like we're poised to bring more cold air down. Everything depends on what happens this coming week. It's like the butterfly effect, right? Something small here can affect something big down the road. The same could be said, especially with this weekend storm. And what happens in the next week will be dictated by not what happens here, but what's going on out in the Pacific. What are the models not picking up on? You can see how this numerical weather data can be off a little bit. Something when we look out this far that I like to look at is the ensemble data. This is what we're looking at least the best chance for snow out of that next system that moves through here from Montana down into the Midwest. You're starting to see the numbers grow here. This is the potential of seeing more than 6 inches of snow. And in some of these areas, especially across Iowa and parts of Nebraska, some of that snow is actually going to fall over the next couple of days. And then around the Great Lakes, we've got the lake effect snow going here. And then, of course, across the Colorado Rockies into the mountains of Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, we've got snow back here. But in this particular video, we're going to continue to track the idea of our weekend storm into next week. Here's a closer look at those snow probabilities over 6 inches, again, across the central U.S. from South Dakota, North Dakota. That would slide south. And I think the problem is also going to be some ice on the southern side of this storm, which would clearly eat into some of these snow totals. So don't hang your hat on an exact solution just yet, because I certainly am not. I'm going to show you a couple of operational model runs. Take this and do what you will with it. Feeling confident about what's happening over the next couple of days. Low pressure moves into the northeast. There's a full forecast on my channel if you want to dive into all the details, but we're going to go through this pretty quickly, and I just want to show you the operational differences for our potential winter storm heading into next weekend. There it comes, into the West Coast by Friday. And I talk about sampling the atmosphere. You've got weather balloons going up in different areas across the West. So as we start to sample what's going on in the atmosphere at the major National Weather Service offices, again, remember, we're only sampling in those areas too. So really, you're just interpolating, or at least the models are, trying to figure out what's going on between those weather balloon samples. So it's easy to see how, I mean, honestly, it surprises me that we can get it this accurate, or at least the models can down the road. In some ways, you may say that's why it's terrible. You can never get anything right. Yeah, they're wrong a lot when you look out in long range, but when you start to see some consensus building around the idea that we will see some kind of system across the East Coast, at least through the central U.S. and into the East, I start to pay attention, and it's there. There is no denying that. It's here on the GFS and the European, which is what we're looking at right now. This is what the European had from this afternoon, a bit of a mix here, which makes sense. You've got high pressure to the north, pushing a lot of cold air south, and on the north side of this low, wherever it goes, I think there's going to be a heavy band of snow. This is a Miller B storm setup where your low moves close to the Ohio River. Once it gets to the northeast toward parts of Pennsylvania, boom, you translate your energy now over to the coast. And now you have a coastal low forming. You dynamically cool the atmosphere and you go over to snow. If you're seeing mixed precipitation across parts of southeast Pennsylvania and along coastal areas, you turn cold, winds turn in out of the northwest, and we're done with that storm. I think the Climate Prediction Center is nailing it when they're showing that cold weather expected pretty much across the east. I mean, that's a given. Now the question is, what forms along the Gulf Coast? Does anything form along the Gulf Coast? I showed you the energy for that first storm that's just to the east of Japan. Where will all these players be a week from now? Really, almost 8 days from now, or 9 days, some would argue. Your guess would be as good as mine, and that's why there's so many differences here. And the European today didn't do much. Last night, it was hinting at something, trying to form here along the coast. The GFS was going ballistic with a huge snowstorm next week. There comes the GFS with our storm heading into this weekend, bringing that snow to the northern plains, the central United States, from Nebraska into Kansas, Missouri, snow into Illinois, Indiana on the GFS from this afternoon. And then as it moves into the northeast, this looks more likely than what it was showing yesterday. It does translate the low now to the coast, which makes sense. And then you get some snow here right along the coast as our storm moves out, cold northwest winds behind it. And then on the back end here, something would try to form, you would think, on the tail end of our front. And the GFS said it was going to. And not only did it say it was going to, it really tried to go crazy this morning. I think that's an outlier, okay? Again, this is guidance. What did the latest guidance show us? Everything suppressed to the east. All right. So, and I'm not saying that may happen, but there's an outside chance that we could see a significant snowstorm still, I think, late next week, not based on any particular piece of energy. So we're feeling good that we get this first storm, we turn cold, and now you've got to watch what happens here on the west end of wherever our boundary sets up. Again, here's a wider look at your best chance for snow over the next week. These are better than 3 inches of snow through Monday. And at this point, to summarize, the bottom line is I still think we're seeing some kind of storm as we head into next weekend, to the first part of next week. I'll be tracking it all week. I'll see you next time.